There's a specific kind of terror that arrives at 3:47 in the morning, not the kind you can explain to your doctor, not the kind your friends understand when you try to describe it over coffee. The kind that makes you lie perfectly still in the dark, heart pounding, absolutely convinced that something is desperately, irreversibly wrong. Elena Torres knows that terror intimately. For months, she woke at exactly 3:47 a.m. not to an alarm, not to a sound, but to the suffocating certainty that her life, as she knew it, was ending. At 57 years old, after 3 decades of being needed, being useful, being the strong one everyone counted on, she found herself completely unraveled by a question she'd never had to ask before. Now what? Her children were gone. Her identity was fractured. Her prayers felt like they evaporated before reaching the ceiling. And every single night, her body woke her in the dark hours, as if to say, "Pay attention. Something has to change." The ER doctors found nothing wrong. The medication dulled the panic, but didn't touch the source. Everyone kept telling her to pray harder, fight harder, be stronger. But Elena had nothing left to fight with. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known while lying awake at 3:47 a.m. convinced she was failing at everything, was that this wasn't a breakdown. It was a doorway, an invitation from God to discover something she'd been missing her entire life. Something that would transform her 3:47 a.m. anxiety into 5 a.m. peace. Something that would change not just her mornings, but her entire understanding of what it means to be a woman of faith after 50. This is the story of soul flowing, not a program, not a method, not another thing to add to your already overwhelming to-do list, but a way of being that replaces grinding with grace, striving with receiving, performance with presence. If you've ever woken up in the dark hours wondering what's wrong with you, if you've ever felt like your best years are behind you and you don't know who you are anymore, if you've ever been so tired of trying to be spiritual that you've considered giving up entirely, this story is for you. Because what happened to Elena is happening to women all over the world. Christian women over 50 who are being invited into something their souls have been longing for, but didn't have language to name. Elena Torres hadn't slept past 3:47 a.m. in 43 nights. The red digits on her nightstand had become a countdown timer she couldn't stop watching. Daily appointment with dread she never scheduled but always kept. Tonight was no different. Her eyes opened before the alarm, before the neighbor's dog, before even the possibility of dawn. The house around her felt cavernous in ways it never had when 3 teenagers crashed through its hallways. Now, the silence had texture, thick, suffocating, accusatory. The anxiety arrived like clockwork. First, the heart pounding, then the shallow breathing, then the cascade of thoughts that felt less like thinking and more like drowning. You're 57. Your children don't need you. Your body is failing. You gave 30 years to nursing, and what do you have to show for it? She'd Googled waking up at 3 a.m. spiritual meaning so many times her phone now auto-suggested it. The results always said the same thing. The Holy Spirit is calling you. This is your prayer hour. God is waking you for a reason. Elena wanted to believe that. She desperately wanted to believe that. But this didn't feel like God. This felt like punishment. She slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway in her father's old flannel robe. The kitchen was dark except for the microwave clock. 3:51 a.m. Elena filled the kettle and sat at the kitchen table where she'd served approximately 11,000 family meals, staring at the steam rising from her cup. Pray, she told herself. Just pray. But the words wouldn't come. They used to pour out of her as naturally as breath morning devotions before her shift. Whispered intercessions over patience, grateful exhalations while folding laundry. Prayer had been her native language. Now, it felt like she was trying to speak through concrete. What those Christian women over 50 seemed to understand, something Elena was only beginning to glimpse, was that maybe this wasn't about fighting at all. Maybe the 3:47 pattern wasn't a battle she was losing. Maybe it was an invitation she didn't yet know how to accept. But that revelation was still weeks away. Tonight, she was just a woman drinking cold chamomile tea in her dead father's robe, counting the hours until she could pretend to be functional again. Elena had no idea that in 21 days, this exact kitchen table would become her sanctuary. That the darkness she was enduring would transform into a doorway. That the anxiety fracturing her sleep would eventually crack her open. Just enough to let something new, something flow and finally find its way in. But for now, she finished her tea, and she waited for dawn like a prisoner waits for parole. The panic attacks started 3 weeks after Sophia left for Austin. Elena could pinpoint it exactly because she'd been fine at the airport, smiling, taking photos, helping her youngest daughter haul overstuffed suitcases through security. She'd been fine driving home alone on I-10, windows down, worship music playing, and then she woke up at 2:11 a.m. convinced she was dying. Her first thought was heart attack. She was a nurse, she knew the signs. The crushing chest pressure, the radiating pain down her left arm, the absolute certainty that her body was betraying her in some catastrophic, irreversible way. Mark drove her to the ER where she'd worked for 18 years. Dr. Patel ordered an EKG, troponin levels, chest X. Everything came back perfect. Textbook normal. He sat on the edge of her bed and said the words she already knew were coming. Elena, this is a panic attack. A severe one, but not cardiac. The second attack came 5 nights later. Then 4 nights after that. Then, every single night for a week. She stopped going to the ER. There was no point. She knew what it was. She just didn't know how to make it stop. What made it worse was that Elena had spent 3 decades ministering to people in crisis. She'd held the hands of dying patients and prayed them into eternity. She'd counseled teenage mothers and whispered scripture over gunshot victims. She knew the theology. She knew the verses. She knew that God had not given her a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. So why was her mind fracturing every night at 3:47 a.m.? One particularly brutal morning, after the panic had finally released its grip around 5:15 a.m., Elena sat in her bathroom and searched her phone. Why do I wake up with anxiety every night? Christianity? The top result was a blog post titled, "The 3 a.m. Wake-Up Call. When God Interrupts Your Sleep for Prayer?" She read it twice. Then she started crying so hard she had to muffle the sound with a towel. The post talked about how the enemy attacks us in our weakest hours, how spiritual warfare intensifies in the night watches, how we must armor up, rebuke the darkness, claim victory, stand firm, fight back. Elena was so tired of fighting. That's what she wrote in her journal that morning. I don't want to be a warrior anymore. I don't want to conquer anything. I just want to sleep. I just want this crushing weight on my chest to lift so I can breathe without wondering if it's the last breath I'll ever take. She closed the journal, took a shower, put on her favorite jeans and the turquoise earrings Sophia had given her for Mother's Day, and she went to Wednesday morning Bible study like a woman who had it all together. Because that's what you did when you were 57 and you'd built a reputation as the strong one. You showed up. Even when you were disintegrating from the inside out. Elena made an appointment with her doctor on a Thursday afternoon, squeezing it between a grocery run and picking up Mark's dry cleaning. Dr. Richardson had been her physician for 12 years, a methodical woman in her early 60s who'd navigated Elena through the entire hormonal circus of perimenopause without once making her feel hysterical. So, Dr. Richardson said, settling onto her rolling stool, "Tell me what's going on." Elena had rehearsed this. She'd planned to be clinical, factual, nurse to doctor, professional. Instead, she burst into tears before she finished the first sentence. Dr. Richardson listened without interrupting. Then she did a full workup: thyroid panel, cortisol levels, hormone markers, even an echocardiogram to rule out anything cardiac. Everything came back normal. Elena, Dr. Richardson said during the follow-up appointment, your body is functioning beautifully, but your nervous system is stuck in threat mode. This is a stress response, not a medical emergency. Elena nodded. She appreciated the validation, but part of her had wanted something wrong. Something fixable. A diagnosis with a protocol, because if it was medical, she knew how to handle it. This formless dread that arrived every night without warning. She had no training for that. She filled the prescriptions, took the sertraline every morning with breakfast. The edge came off the panic, less acute, less crushing, but the waking continued. The day after her second follow-up with Dr. Richardson, Elena sat in her parked car outside Target, scrolling through her phone, when she stumbled across a podcast episode, The Biblical Significance of Waking at Night. She pressed play. The host talked about the Jewish practice of night watches, how ancient believers divided the night into 3-hour segments of prayer, how Jesus himself withdrew to pray in the darkness. What if, the host said, your waking isn't a curse? What if it's not even warfare? What if God is simply making space in your life, literal space, and you're scheduled to meet with you when everything else is finally quiet? Elena sat in the Target parking lot, engine off, phone clutched in both hands. What if, though Richardson was right that her body wasn't broken? And what if the podcast host was right that God wasn't punishing her? What if this was an invitation she'd been too terrified to accept? She looked at the clock on her dashboard to 17 p.m. In approximately 13 hours, she'd wake up again. Her heart would race. Her thoughts would spiral. And she'd have a choice. She could keep fighting the waking, or she could try something different. The idea terrified her almost as much as the panic attacks themselves, but something deep in her chest beneath the anxiety, beneath the fear, whispered that she might not have a choice. Ready or not, something was shifting. Elena Maria Torres was born in a 2-bedroom house on the west side of San Antonio in 1968, the third of 5 children in a family where love was abundant and money was not. She learned early how to be useful. At 8 years old, she was changing her baby brother's diapers. At 12, she was cooking dinner for the family while her mother worked late shifts. At 15, she was translating medical documents for her abuela, who spoke only Spanish and had diabetes. No one in the family fully understood how to manage. That's how she ended up in nursing. She met Mark in the hospital cafeteria during her second year as an RN. He was a medical equipment sales rep, charming and steady and completely unfazed by her tendency to order people around. They were married 8 months later in her childhood church, honeymooned in Port Aransas, and had their first baby Daniel 14 months after that. Then came Isabella, then Sophia. For 27 years, Elena's life followed a rhythm she could predict: shifts at the hospital, kids' activities, church on Sundays, family dinners, annual vacations to South Padre, birthday parties, graduations, broken hearts mended over ice cream, college applications, move-in days. She was needed constantly, overwhelmingly, beautifully needed. And then, in the space of 4 years, everyone left. Elena kept meaning to clean out the rooms, turn them into something new. A craft space, a home gym, an office for Mark. But she couldn't bring herself to do it, because if she erased the evidence that her children had lived there, what evidence remained that she had lived there, that the last 3 decades had meant something? She'd brought it up once with her friend Claudia over lunch, this feeling of being suddenly, devastatingly optional in her own life. Claudia had laughed. Girl, you've got freedom now. Travel, take up painting, sleep in. Elena had smiled and nodded and changed the subject. The problem was that she'd never learned how to be Elena without being needed. Nurse Elena, yes, she still had that. 3 12-hour shifts a week in the cardiac unit. Still competent, still valued, but who was she at 4 a.m.? When she couldn't sleep and the house was silent and there was no crisis to solve, no wound to bandage, no person to reassure. She didn't know. The anxiety attacks made sense now. In retrospect, her entire identity was unraveling, and her body was responding the only way it knew how. Panic, alert, crisis mode, except there was no emergency to respond to. Just a 57-year-old woman waking up every night at 3:47 a.m., heart pounding, asking the darkness the one question she'd never had to ask before. Now what? Elena had been praying since she was 6 years old. Her abuela taught her every night before bed. They'd kneel together on the one rug in the living room, and they'd pray the Our Father in Spanish. Then a Hail Mary, then a litany of requests for family members by name. It was muscle memory. Breath. the architecture of her spiritual life. When she got older, she branched out. She read books about prayer, the power of a praying wife, intercessory prayer, the circle maker. She attended conferences where women with microphones taught strategies for effective prayer. She prayed Daniel through his teenage rebellion, prayed Isabella through anxiety and an eating disorder, prayed Sophia through the coming out conversation that had left them both crying in the driveway. Prayer worked, not in a vending machine way. She wasn't naive, but it worked in the sense that it connected her to something bigger than herself. It calmed her, centered her, until it didn't. The first time she noticed the shift was about 6 weeks after Sophia left. Elena woke at 3:47 a.m. with the familiar chest tightness, and instead of spiraling into panic, she thought, okay, pray, just pray. She tried. She started with thanksgiving, but the words felt hollow, performative, like she was reading a script she'd memorized but no longer believed. She switched to confession, but that felt worse, like she was apologizing for being human. She attempted intercession, but her mind wandered after 3 names, and she couldn't pull it back. Finally, she just sat there in the dark and said, God, I don't know what to say. Silence. It was like her spiritual phone line had been disconnected. She could still dial the number. She still had all the right words, the right postures, the right techniques, but no one was picking up on the other end. She confessed it to Pastor Jim after a Sunday service. I can't pray anymore, she whispered. I try, but it's like the words just evaporate. Pastor Jim put a kind hand on her shoulder. Elena, you're going through a transition. This is a season. It'll pass. Keep showing up. Keep trying. She'd nodded, thanked him, walked to her car, and she'd felt absolutely nothing. What Pastor Jim didn't understand was that maybe the problem wasn't her technique. Maybe the way she'd been taught to pray was designed for a version of herself that no longer existed. One night, around week 9 of the 347 pattern, Elena gave up trying. She didn't set an intention to pray. She didn't open her Bible or her devotional or her prayer journal. She just sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and stared out the window at the live oak tree in the backyard. And for the first time in months, she felt something close to peace. Not because she'd prayed correctly, but because she'd finally stopped trying to force a conversation. God apparently wasn't interested in having that way anymore. When dawn began to crack the horizon with thin streaks of violet and gold, Elena felt the strangest sensation. God had been there the whole time, not waiting for her to perform, not grading her prayer life, not disappointed by her silence, just present, like a companion sitting across from her, content to share the quiet. That morning, for the first time since the waking pattern started, Elena didn't feel like she was failing. She felt like she was learning. The breakdown happened at Bible study. They were studying the book of Ruth. Week 6, the threshing floor scene where Ruth approaches Boaz in the middle of the night. Denise, who was leading that week, said brightly, "So what I love about Ruth is her boldness, her courage. That's the kind of faith-based productivity we all need, right? That warrior spirit." The other women murmured agreement. Elena felt something crack inside her chest. I can't do this anymore. 7 faces turned toward her, smiles fading into concern. Can't do what, honey? Claudia asked gently. This. The warrior thing. The bold faith thing. The taking action and claiming victory thing. I can't. I'm so tired. Denise leaned forward. Elena, we all get tired, no? Elena's voice was louder than she intended. You don't understand. I'm not tired like I need a nap. I wake up every single night at 3:47 in the morning with a panic attack. Every night. For 3 months. And everyone keeps telling me to pray harder, fight harder, stand firmer, and I can't. I have nothing left to fight with. Silence filled Claudia's living room. I went to the ER thinking I was having a heart attack. Elena continued, tears coming now. I've had every test. I'm on medication. I've tried praying. I've tried rebuking. I've tried worship music and scripture and literally everything. And I'm still waking up every night convinced I'm dying. She looked around the circle. And the worst part is that I used to be the one helping other people through this. I was the prayer warrior you called at 2 a.m. And now I can't even pray for myself without feeling like I'm faking it. Michelle, who rarely spoke up, said quietly, "How long have you felt this way?" "Since Sophia left for college. Since I became completely unnecessary. Since I realized I built my entire identity around being needed and now nobody needs me and I have no idea who I am anymore." Patricia, who was 64 and had buried her husband 3 years prior, spoke up. "What if you stopped trying?" Elena looked at her. "What? What if you just stopped? Stopped fighting? Stopped performing? What if the waking isn't something to defeat? What if it's something to listen to?" Claudia reached over and squeezed her hand. "We've been so focused on helping you fix this, but maybe you don't need fixing. Maybe you just need permission to fall apart." And that's when Elena really broke. Claudia pulled her into a hug. Michelle rubbed her back. Patricia handed her more tissues. Nobody tried to fix it. Nobody quoted Romans 8:28. Nobody offered solutions. They just sat with her in it. When the crying finally subsided, Patricia smiled. "Then maybe for now, you do nothing. You just show up. Keep waking up at 3:47, but stop fighting it. Just be awake and see what happens." Elena drove home an hour later feeling lighter than she had in months. Not because anything had changed, but because she'd finally told the truth, and the truth, it turned ouchy, had its own kind of power. Elena couldn't stop thinking about what Patricia had said, just be awake and see what happens. That night, when her eyes opened at 3:47 a.m., she didn't reach for her phone, didn't mentally catalog her symptoms, didn't try to pray herself back to sleep. She just lay there, listening to Mark's breathing and the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. After 10 minutes, the anxiety started its usual climb. But instead of fighting it, she'll let it wash over her, observe it like a nurse observing a patient. And then she got up. She walked downstairs to the living room, turned on a single lamp, and reached for her Bible, not because someone had told her to, but because she genuinely wanted to know, had anyone else in Scripture ever felt this kind of nighttime terror? She opened 2 Psalms and started skimming. Then she found Psalm 63-6. "On my bed I remember you. I think of you through the watches of the night." Watches of the night. Elena grabbed her phone and Googled it, found articles about ancient Jewish timekeeping, how the night was divided into 3 watches: evening, midnight, and morning, how soldiers and priests would rotate shifts, keeping vigil while others slept, how this wasn't just poetic language. It was a practice. Being awake in the night wasn't abnormal. It was ancient. She kept reading, found references scattered throughout Scripture. Jesus praying in the 4th watch. David's soul waiting for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning. Paul and Silas singing hymns at midnight in a prison cell. The pattern was everywhere once she started looking for it. What if the 3:47 pattern wasn't a malfunction? What if her body was trying to create space for something her daytime life had no room for? She thought about her old morning routine with God. 20 minutes of rushed prayer before a 12-hour shift. Functional, efficient, productive. But this was different. This was 3, sometimes 4 hours of nothing but silence and darkness and the terrifying gift of unstructured time. She flipped to the Gospel of Mark, found the passage where Jesus withdrew to a solitary place very early in the morning to pray. Often, not once, not occasionally. Often. If he needed it, how? Had she convinced herself? She didn't. Elena closed her Bible and sat in the lamplight. It was 4:32 a.m. In 90 minutes, Mark's alarm would go off. The day would start. But right now, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in months. Curiosity. What if she stopped trying to fix the waking and started paying attention to what the waking was trying to show her? The sky outside her window was still black, but somewhere beyond the darkness, dawn was coming. Elena could wait. Elena started reading the Gospels differently, not as a nurse looking for prescriptions, But as a woman trying to understand what Jesus actually did with his time when nobody was watching, she made a list in the back of her journal. Every reference to Jesus and darkness, Jesus and solitude, Jesus and the hours between sunset and sunrise. The pattern startled her. Mark 1:35, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Luke 6:12, one of those days Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. Matthew 14:23, after he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, an entire night. Not an hour, not a quick devotional, an entire night on a mountainside alone, talking to his Father. Jesus wasn't in a hurry. Even when Lazarus was dying, Jesus didn't rush. He stayed where he was for 2 more days. Not because he didn't care, but because he was moving in rhythm with the Father, not in reaction to human urgency. Elena wrote in her journal, "What if hurry is a form of violence against my soul?" Jesus worked hard, yes, but he worked in rhythm. Rest and labor, solitude and community, intensity and withdrawal. One morning at 4:15 a.m., Elena read the Gethsemane passage in Matthew 26. Jesus asking Peter, James, and John to keep watch with him, finding them asleep. "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?" She'd always read that as rebuke, but this chimney, something else struck her. Jesus wanted companionship in his suffering. He asked his friends to simply stay awake, to be present, not to fix anything, not to solve anything, just to be awake with him. What if 2,000 years later, Jesus was still asking, "Will you keep watch with me?" Elena set down her Bible and stared at the lamp. Was that what this was? An invitation to be awake when everyone else was asleep. To sit in the darkness with the one who understands what it's like to carry unbearable weight at 3 a.m. The thought made her cry. If the 3:47 waking was less about her doing something for God and more about God making space to just be with her, then everything changed. The next night, when she woke at 3:51 a.m., Elena didn't fight it. She made tea, sat on the couch with a blanket, and whispered, "Okay, I'm here. I'm awake. I don't know what you want me to do, but I'm here." Nothing dramatic happened. No visions, no audible voice. Just quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet. Not empty, full. Like the air before a rainstorm. Like the silence in a concert hall right before the orchestra begins. Expectant, and somewhere in that hour, a thought dropped into her mind, not in her own voice, but gentle, certain, undeniable. "You've spent 30 years being useful. What if I just want you to be mine?" Elena's breath caught. What if God didn't need her to be useful? What if he just wanted her company? She thought about Mary sitting at Jesus' feet while Martha worked herself into a frenzy. Jesus saying, "Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." Christian women over 50 weren't supposed to just be, they were supposed to mentor, serve, pray, volunteer, make their lives count. But what if the counting was the problem? What if the most important thing Elena could do at 57 wasn't to find a new mission or purpose, but to learn how to sit in the dark with Jesus and let him love her, not for what she could do, but for who she was? The sky outside was lightening. Dawn was coming, and Elena, for the first time in months, felt something that wasn't anxiety or exhaustion or fear. She felt hopey. The shift happened on a Tuesday. Elena woke at 4:11 a.m., and for the first time in 3.5 months, her heart wasn't pounding. No chest tightness. No surge of adrenaline. Just awake. Like her body had gently tapped her shoulder and said, "Time to get up." She got up slowly, wrapped herself in the flannel robe, and walked downstairs. The house felt different at 4:11 a.m. than it did at 3:47 a.m. Less haunted, like the darkness had softened somehow, become less of an enemy and more of a companion. Elena didn't make tea this time. She just sat on the couch, pulled the blanket over her legs, and closed her eyes. Not to sleep, not to pray, exactly. just to be still. And then she did something she'd never done before in her entire life. She surrendered. She whispered it out loud. I give up. The words should have felt like defeat. Instead, they felt like relief. I give up trying to fix this. I give up trying to be the person I was 5 years ago. I give up trying to earn your love by being useful or strong or spiritually mature. I give up pretending I know what I'm doing. I'm done. Her voice cracked. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but they weren't frantic tears. They were clean. I don't know how to be 57. I don't know how to have a quiet house. I don't know how to stop grinding. God, I've been grinding my whole life, and I'm so tired. The word caught in her throat. Grinding. She'd been grinding against her life for 57 years, always pushing, always striving, always trying to earn her place at the table. I can't do it anymore, Elena whispered. So either you meet me here in this exhausted mess, or I don't know what happens next. She sat in the silence after that confession, and she waited, and slowly, so slowly, she almost didn't notice it happening. Something inside her chest began to loosen. The tight note of performance that had lived in her solar plexus since childhood. The constant low-level tension of trying to prove she was worth keeping. It began to untangle. She thought about a verse she'd memorized as a child. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. What if rest wasn't a destination? What if it was a posture? What if Jesus wasn't saying, grind until you're exhausted and then I'll give you a break, but rather, stop grinding, come to me now. My burden is light. She pulled out her phone and typed a note to herself. What if the opposite of grinding isn't laziness? What if it's flowing? The word appeared on her screen. Flowing. And something in Elena's spirit recognized it, not as a new concept, but as something ancient, something she'd been created for but had buried under decades of productivity and performance. Water doesn't grind, it flows. It moves with the current, not against it. It finds the path of least resistance. It yields to the landscape but still reaches the ocean. A river doesn't work to be a river. It just is. The sky outside was lightening. She'd been sitting in surrender for almost an hour, and she felt more rested than she had after most full nights of sleep. Not because her circumstances had changed, but because for the first time in her entire life, she'd stopped trying to swim upstream. And the current, God's current, gentle and relentless and somehow perfectly timed, had caught her. She was flowing. Elena stopped setting an alarm. It seemed like a small thing, but it felt revolutionary. For 30 years, she'd lived by the tyranny of the clock shift schedules, school pickups, medication times, appointment reminders. But after that Tuesday morning surrender, something in her decided no more fighting the waking with the promise of forced sleep. The first night without an alarm, she woke at 3:58 a.m. and felt a flutter of panic before remembering it was her day off. She laughed out loud in the dark bedroom. She got up, made coffee this time instead of tea, and sat at the kitchen table with her Bible. But she didn't open it immediately. Instead, she just sat, held the warm mug between her palms, listened, and what she heard or felt or sensed was this: stop asking what you should do. Start noticing what I'm already doing. Elena blinked, wrote it down in her journal before she could lose it. It felt like a tectonic shift. She'd spent decades asking God for things. Prayer as petition. Prayer as a spiritual to-do list she needed God to help her complete. But what if prayer wasn't about getting God to do what she wanted? What if it was about her learning to see what God was already doing? She opened her Bible and flipped to John 5, found the passage where Jesus said he could do only what he saw the Father doing. Jesus, fully God and fully human, operated from a posture of attention, not ambition. He watched what the Father was doing and joined in. Elena closed her eyes and asked the question differently. Not, what do you want me to do, God, but what are you already doing in my life that I haven't noticed yet? And slowly, like images developing in a dark room, things began to surface. The 3:47 waking pattern. What if that was God making space? The panic attacks that had forced her to slow down, what if those were her body saying enough? What if they were a mercy? The empty nest that had felt like loss, what if it was actually an invitation to discover who Elena was outside of motherhood? Even the prayer drought. What if God was weaning her off performance-based spirituality so she could learn a deeper kind of communion? Tears slipped down Elena's face. If all of this was actually God doing something for her rather than to her, then she'd been fighting the wrong battle. The sky outside was beginning to lighten. Elena checked the time. 5:23 a.m. Almost 90 minutes of just sitting, listening, noticing. She'd accomplished nothing. Checked nothing off a list, solved no problems, and yet she felt more aligned with God than she had in years. So flowing. The phrase dropped into her mind so clearly she almost looked around to see if someone had spoken it out loud. Not grinding against God's rhythm, trying to force outcomes, but flowing with the current he was already creating. She wrote it in her journal, soul flowing, then underneath. When you stop fighting what God is doing and start flowing with it. Elena sat back in her chair, staring at the words. The shift had happened. She'd gone from fighting to listening, from grinding to flowing, from asking God to fit into her agenda to asking where his agenda was already flowing so she could step into the current. The sun crested the horizon. Golden light spilled through the kitchen window. Elena lifted her coffee cup in a silent toast to the God who'd loved her enough to wake her up. Not from sleep, but from the grinding life she'd mistaken for faithfulness. Elena needed to talk to someone about what was happening. She tried with Mark first, over breakfast on a Saturday morning. I think I've been doing my whole spiritual life wrong, she said. Mark looked up from his iPad. Wrong how? Like, I've been trying to force everything, and I think maybe I just need to stop forcing and start flowing. Mark nodded slowly. Okay? That sounds good, Elena laughed. You have no idea what I mean. Not really, he admitted with a smile. But you seem lighter, so whatever flowing is, keep doing it. She texted Patricia. Can we grab coffee? They met Tuesday afternoon. Elena poured out everything, the surrender, the shift, the discovery that she'd been grinding her whole life. And about 2 weeks ago, I just stopped, Elena said. I surrendered. And everything feels different. The waking isn't terrifying anymore. It's become this sacred space. I'm not fighting it, I'm receiving it. Patricia leaned forward. Keep going. Elena pulled out her journal. I wrote this. Soul flowing is when you stop grinding against God's rhythm and start flowing with it. When you stop asking him to bless your agenda and start noticing where he's already moving. She looked up. Does that sound crazy? Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, Elena, that's not crazy. That's the most sane thing I've heard in years. Really? Really? Do you know how many women, especially women our age, are grinding themselves into dust, trying to prove they're still valuable? We've been taught that faithfulness means constant motion, but that's not what Jesus modeled. Yes, Elena felt something release in her chest. Jesus withdrew. Jesus rested. He didn't grind. He flowed in perfect rhythm with the Father. Patricia smiled. What if this season isn't about finding new purpose? What if it's about discovering a new way of being? Not doing less necessarily, but doing differently. From rest instead of striving. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. That's what I needed to hear. They sat in companionable silence. Then Elena said quietly, I think I want to share this with other women. Not in a here's my program way, but just the concept, soul flowing, the idea that maybe we don't have to keep grinding. How would you share it? Patricia asked. I don't know yet. Maybe writing? Maybe just starting with our Bible study? Elena shrugged. I'm trying not to force it. Trying to just flow? Patricia laughed. See? You're already living it. That night, she woke at 4:17 a.m., made her coffee, sat at the kitchen table with her journal, and she wrote, Soul flowing. When you stop grinding against God's rhythm and start flowing with it, when you stop asking him to bless your agenda and start noticing where he's already moving, when you stop performing spiritual maturity and start receiving divine presence, when you stop fighting your season and start trusting your shepherd, when your soul stops grinding and finally learns to flow. She set down her pen and stared at the words. This was it. Not a new method or technique, but a shift. A fundamental reorientation from striving to receiving, from grinding to flowing. And the beautiful, terrifying truth was this: she couldn't teach anyone else how to do it. She could only live it and invite others into the current. Elena's relationship with the Bible had always been utilitarian. She'd memorized verses for Sunday school, highlighted passages for comfort, used scripture like a reference manual. Look up your issue, find the corresponding verse, apply as directed. It had worked. Sort of, but it had never been her river. That changed on a Thursday morning at 4:32 a.m. Elena was sitting at the kitchen table, Bible opened to Psalm 1. She'd read it 100 times before. But this morning, one phrase stopped her cold. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. Streams of water. The tree didn't make the water flow, didn't control it or direct it or earn it. The tree simply positioned itself by the stream and drew from what was already flowing past. And because it was connected to that constant flow, it bore fruit, not by grinding or striving, but by receiving. Elena grabbed her journal and started writing. What if scripture isn't meant to be a reference manual? What if it's the stream itself, the flowing water I position myself beside every morning? Not to extract information, but to receive life. She flipped to Ezekiel 47, the vision of water flowing from the temple, getting deeper and deeper until it became a river no one could cross. And wherever the river flowed, everything lived. Wherever the river flows, everything lives. Not wherever you work hard enough, strategize well enough, pray long enough. Wherever the river flows. Elena felt something shift in her understanding. She'd been trying to generate life through her own efforts, grinding herself down, trying to produce fruit. But fruit doesn't come from grinding. It comes from connection to a source. And the source was already flowing. Over the next week, Elena completely changed how she read scripture. She stopped looking for answers, stopped highlighting verses to memorize or apply. Instead, she just drank. She'd read a passage slowly and asked one question: what's alive here? Where's the flow? So many mornings a phrase would catch her attention and she'd sit with it for 20 minutes. Other mornings, nothing jumped out. She'd just read and let the words wash over her like water. One morning she read John 7:38. Whoever believes in me, as scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them. Rivers, plural, not a trickle, not a carefully rationed resource. Rivers, flowing from within. She thought about Jesus' promise to the woman at the well. The water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. A spring, internal, welling up. Not something she had to work to access. Something that flowed naturally when she stayed connected. She wrote in her journal, I've been trying to produce fruit through discipline and effort, but Jesus said, abide in the vine and the fruit will come naturally. I've been grinding when I should have been grafted. The river is already flowing. I just need to stay close enough to drink. Saturday morning, Elena took her Bible outside to the back porch. The sun was just beginning to color the horizon. She read Psalm 46-45. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Break of day. This exact moment. God is within her. Present tense. Current reality. Elena closed her Bible and sat in the dawn light, listening to the mockingbird cycling through its borrowed songs. The river was flowing, had been flowing all along. She'd just been too busy grinding to notice. It happened on a Wednesday. Elena woke at 4:44 a.m. and for the first time in 18 weeks, she felt genuine joy at being awake. Not relief, not acceptance, but actual, effervescent joy. She made coffee, and instead of sitting at the kitchen table, she felt drawn outside. She grabbed a blanket, stepped onto the back porch, and sat on the swing. The world was perfectly suspended between night and day. The sky was deep indigo, stars still visible but fading. Everything was hushed, expectant. Elena just breathed in, out, in, out. No agenda, no prayer list, no Bible study questions to answer. Just breathing, just being awake, just present. And then, as the sky began its slow transformation from indigo to violet to the palest rose gold, something happened inside Elena's chest. A crack. Not painful. Like hatching. Like something that had been dormant, suddenly opening to let light in. She gasped, 10 tears spilled down her face before she even understood what was happening. It was relief. Bone deep, soul level relief. The kind you feel when you've been holding your breath underwater for so long you forgot you were drowning, and suddenly you surface and air fills your lungs. Elena had been holding her breath for years, holding it through her father's death, through her children's departures, through the fear that she'd become obsolete at 57. And in this moment, this 5 a.m. moment on her back porch, with violet light spilling across the sky, she finally exhaled. The grief came with it. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears streaming down her face while she sat on the swing, watching the day being born. She grieved the version of herself she'd been clinging to. Young Elena. Busy Elena. Needed Elena. That woman was gone, and Elena had been trying to resurrect her through sheer willpower. But that wasn't true. There was this Elena, 57 years old, waking Heichi, dawn, learning to flow instead of grind, learning to be loved for who she was, not what she could produce. This Elena was quieter, slower, less impressive on paper, but she was more alive than she'd been in decades. Thank you, Elena whispered into the breaking dawn. Thank you for not letting me stay who I was. Thank you for waking me up. A breeze moved through the live oak tree. The sky was coral now, shot through with gold. The mockingbird started singing. The world was waking up, but Elena had gotten here first. She'd been given the gift of these secret hours. The hours when heaven felt closer. The hours when she could hear God's voice beneath her own thoughts. This was what finding purpose after 50 looked like. Not a new career or ministry, but this, learning to be fully present to the life she actually had instead of the life she thought she should have. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. Mom, can we FaceTime later? Elena smiled. Texted back. Of course, baby. Call whenever. There would be time for Sophia later. Time for the hospital shift tomorrow. Time for all the regular rhythms of life. But right now, in this thin space between night and morning, Elena had an appointment with God. The sun crested the horizon, spilling liquid gold across the yard. She closed her eyes and turned toward it like a flower, and she felt it in her bones. This was what she'd been made for. Not the grinding, not the striving, but this. This sacred, ordinary morning. This light breaking through darkness. This breathing in rhythm with creation. Soul flowing. It wasn't a program or a method. It was a way of being. A return to her original design. Elena opened her eyes. The world was fully awake now, brilliant and new. And so was she. She stood from the swing, stretched, felt the blanket fall from her shoulders. The day was here, and for the first time in months, maybe, years, Elena was actually ready to meet it. Not with a battle plan, but with a song. The breakdown happened 3 days later, completely without warning. Elena was folding laundry in the bedroom when she picked up Sophia's old hoodie from UT Austin. It still smelled like Sophia's perfume, that vanilla coconut body spray she'd worn since high school. Elena held the hoodie to her face and inhaled, and everything she'd been holding back for months came pouring out. She sank onto the bed and sobbed, not the quiet tears from the porch. This was guttural, The kind of crying that comes from your diaphragm. She cried for Sophia, for the little girl who used to climb into bed during thunderstorms, for the teenager who'd come out to her in the driveway, for the young woman who'd driven away to Austin without looking back. She cried for Isabella and Daniel, for all the moments she'd missed while working night shifts. She cried for her marriage, for the years when Mark traveled constantly, for the way they drifted into comfortable roommate status. She cried for her father, for the man he'd been before Alzheimer's erased him. She cried for her body, for the panic attacks, for the weight gain, for the way she looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. She cried for herself, for young Elena who'd had dreams, for middle-aged Elena who'd run herself into the ground, for current Elena who was terrified she'd wasted her life. Mark appeared in the doorway. "Elena, what's wrong?" She couldn't answer, could only shake her head and keep crying. He sat beside her, put his arm around her shoulders. "Talk to me." "Nothing happened," she managed. "That's the problem. I just spent 30 years and suddenly they're gone and I don't know what I did with them." "You raised 3 incredible humans," Mark said quietly. "You saved lives. You took care of your father. You kept our family together. That's not nothing. But what do I have to show for it? They don't need me anymore. And I'm just this exhausted woman who doesn't know what she's supposed to do with the rest of her life." Mark was quiet. "Then, maybe you don't have to do anything. Maybe you can just be?" Elena pulled back, looked at him. "What you've been doing for everyone else since you were 12 years old. What if this season is just about being not Elena the nurse or Elena the mom? Just Elena, I don't know how to do that. I know." He wiped tears from her cheek. "But maybe that's what you're supposed to learn." That made her cry harder, but it was different now. Cleaner. They sat there for a long time, Mark holding her while she cried. Eventually, the sobs subsided into exhausted quiet. "I think I've been holding everything together for so long that I forgot how to let go," she said. Mark nodded. "I think that's what these last few months have been. Your breaking point, and I think you needed it. I miss them. I miss who they used to be. I miss who I used to be. But I think I'm also starting to see that maybe this isn't an ending. Maybe it's just a different beginning." She told him about soul flowing, about the shift from grinding to receiving. Marky listened. When she finished, he said, "That makes sense. You've always been a river person. But then life got busy and you started swimming upstream against everything. Maybe it's time to let the current carry you." Elena leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm scared of who I might be if I'm not needed anymore." "You'll always be needed. But maybe now you get to choose what that looks like, instead of everybody else choosing for you." Elena felt emptied out, wrung dry, but in a good way, like she'd been carrying a backpack full of stones and had finally set it down. The emotional release hadn't solved anything, but something had shifted. She'd let herself break, let herself grieve, let herself be held instead of doing all the holding, and the sky hadn't fallen. She'd cried, she'd confessed, she'd admitted she was lost and scared, and instead of making everything worse, it had somehow made everything lighter. The rhythm revealed itself slowly, the way dawn reveals a landscape, not all at once, but detail by detail. Elena started noticing it first in small things, like the way her body naturally wanted to wake around 4:30 a.m., now not with panic, but with a quiet internal signal. Like the way she'd finish her coffee and feel drawn outside, not because she'd read it was good for you, but because something in her responded to birdsong and breaking light, like the way certain scriptures would surface in her mind throughout the day, not because she'd memorized them, but because they'd settled into her during those 5 a.m. readings. It was a rhythm she wasn't creating. She was discovering it. One morning, Elena read Psalm 127-2. "In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves." Sleep to those he loves. Not sleep you earn. Just sleep, a gift, given freely, to the beloved. Elena thought about her decades of early rising for work 4:30 a.m. alarms, dragging herself out of bed exhausted, that had been toiling. But this was different. This was waking to something, not for something. The difference was everything. She started noticing God's rhythm in other places too. In the way the days had natural ebbs and flows, morning energy, midday lull, evening winding down. She'd spent years fighting that rhythm. Now she was learning to work with it, to do creative work in the morning when her mind was fresh, to rest in the afternoon without guilt. Her shifts at the hospital were different too. She'd always prided herself on efficiency. But lately, she'd been slowing down, taking an extra minute to really listen, sitting at the bedside instead of standing. One patient, an elderly woman named Rose, said to her, "You're different from the other nurses. You're not in a hurry. You look at me like I'm a person, not a problem to solve." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you for saying that, because that's what the rhythm was teaching her. Presence over productivity. This was what biblical rest for women really meant. Not just taking a day off, but learning to live at God's pace instead of the world's pace. She started paying attention to Jesus' rhythm in the Gospels, how he'd minister to thousands, then withdraw to pray. He was never in a hurry. Elena wrote in her journal, "What if hurry is violence against my soul?" Jesus wasn't frantic. He worked in rhythm, rest and labor, solitude and community. She tried an experiment. For one full week, she asked herself, does this feel like flowing or forcing? Making breakfast for Mark. Flowing. Scrolling social media for an hour. Forcing. Going to Bible study. Flowing. Volunteering for 3 committees. Forcing. She started saying no. Simply, that doesn't fit my rhythm right now. One Sunday, Denise cornered her. "Elena, I miss you. You used to be so involved. Now you're just quieter. Are you okay?" Elena smiled. "I'm more okay than I've been in years. But you're not doing as much." "No, I'm not. I'm being more. Doing less, and it turns out that's what I needed." She drove home feeling peaceful, not defensive, just settled, because she was finally living in rhythm with something bigger than herself, something ancient and true and gentle. God's rhythm wasn't loud or demanding. It whispered. It invited. It made space and waited patiently. That night, she woke at 4:44 a.m., made her coffee, sat on the porch, wrapped in her blanket. The rhythm was there in the darkness. Steady, patient, eternal. The rhythm of breath, of heartbeat, of stars wheeling overhead and seasons turning. God's rhythm. The rhythm she'd been created to move in but had spent 57 years resisting. Until now. Elena closed her eyes and synchronized her breathing too. Eat, in, out, receive. Release, flow. Elena didn't set out to create a sacred space. It just sort of happened. It started with a blanket. The old crochet one her abuela had made cream and turquoise, soft from decades of washing. Elena had kept it folded in a linen closet, too precious to use. But one chilly morning, she grabbed it on impulse, wrapped it around her shoulders on the back porch, and immediately felt abuela's presence with her. Elena started using that blanket every morning. Then came the mug, handmade ceramic, deep blue glaze, from Isabella 3 years ago. The coffee tasted better in that mug. That became her morning mug. Then the journal, leather-bound, cream pages. It cost more than she'd normally spend on a notebook, but something in her knew, this matters. This morning practice matters enough to invest in. Next came the porch chair. She and Mark went to a furniture store and she found a wide wicker chair with deep cushions. Mark raised his eyebrows at the price tag. For sitting outside in the morning. For meeting God every morning, Elena, for the next 20 years. That's worth a good chair. He bought it, set it up on the back porch facing east. Elena sat in it the next morning and felt something settle. This is my spotty, where I come home to myself, where I come home to God. Over the following weeks, Other elements accumulated. A small side table mark made in his workshop, a solar lantern for dark mornings, a basket for her journal, pens, reading glasses, wind chimes hanging from the porch. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing, didn't post photos. This was just for her. And for God, her flow space. Patricia came over for coffee one Saturday and noticed the setup. Elena, this is beautiful. When did you do all this? Gradually, over the last month. Every morning I'd think, what would make this even better? And I'd add something. Patricia ran her hand over the armrest. It's not decorated, it's curated. What's the difference? Decoration is about showing people who you are. Curation is about creating space to become who you are. Patricia smiled. This isn't trying to impress anyone. It's just yours. Honest. That word honest settled into Elena's heart. Each item had meaning. Each served the flow. A few days later, Claudia asked, "What are you doing?" "Everyone's talking about how you've changed." Elena laughed. "It's a chair on my back porch with a blanket and a lamp. But you're out there every morning at like 4 in the morning, 4:30 usually. For how long? An hour? Sometimes 2. Claudia's eyes widened. Doing what? Drinking coffee, reading scripture, writing, mostly just being quiet, being present, being with God without an agenda. Do you think I could do it?" Elena reached across the table. "You don't need to copy what I'm doing. Your flow space might look completely different. The question is, where do I feel most connected?" "I don't know. I've never asked myself that." "Then start there. Just notice where you feel most at peace, most yourself, most opened to God." Claudia nodded slowly. "Can I come see your space sometime?" Of course. They met Wednesday at 5 a.m. Elena made coffee for both of them, and they sat together on the back porch. They didn't talk much, just watched the sun rise, listened to the birds. When Claudia left, she had tears in her eyes. "I forgot that God could feel like that. Gentle, not demanding, just present. Come back whenever you want." Elena Torres. Elena Torres. Over the next few weeks, 3 more women asked to join her. Some mornings it was just Elena. Some mornings there were 4 women on the porch, each with their own coffee, their own blanket, their own silence. Elena's flow space had become bigger than her personal practice. It was becoming a doorway for other women who were exhausted from grinding. But it all started with a chair, a blanket, a mug, small things, honest things, things that said, "This matters enough to make space for." You can't flow if you don't have space to flow in. Creating a flow space, curating a place that invited her to slow down, to sink in, that changed everything. The space wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. It was a boundary that said, "This hour belongs to God and me." And that boundary was holy ground. Elena hadn't planned to tell anyone at Bible study, but 3 weeks after creating her flow space, Denise asked everyone to share prayer requests. Then Denise turned to Elena. "How about you? You've been so quiet lately." Elena hesitated. The old her would have deflected. "Honestly," Elena said, "I'm learning how to stop grinding my way through my spiritual life. Learning to just be with God without needing it to look productive." The room went quiet. Then Joanna, 62-year-old widow who rarely spoke, said softly, "Tell me more about that." So Elena did. She talked about the 347 waking, the panic attacks, the surrender, the discovery of soul flowing. Joanne started crying. "I thought I was the only one," Joanne whispered. "I used to love my quiet times, and now it's like nothing. I've been so ashamed." "Me too," said Michelle. "I wake up at weird hours and lay there feeling guilty that I'm not praying right." "Same," added Brenda. "Everyone keeps asking what I'm going to do now, and I just want to scream that I don't want to do anything." One by one, 7 women admitted they were struggling, exhausted, trying to force a spiritual practice that no longer fit. Elena felt something shift in the room. What if we're not broken? Elena said quietly. What if this is just transition? What if we're being invited into something different and we keep trying to force ourselves back into what worked when we were 30? The question hung in the air. Then Patricia spoke up. What if we tried it? A few of us meeting early one morning to practice being instead of doing. 4 women raised their hands immediately. They decided on Thursday morning, 5 a.m. at Elena's house. The first Thursday, 5 women showed up. Elena made coffee, led them to the back porch. So, Michelle said, what do we do? Nothing, Elena said. We just show up, sit, be quiet. If you want to pray, pray. If you want to read, read. If you want to just drink coffee and watch the sunrise, do that. They sat. It was awkward at first. The quiet felt exposing, but Elena had learned discomfort was often the doorway. Gradually, the women settled. Michelle pulled out a journal. Patricia closed her eyes. Joanne just stared at the sky, tears sliding down her face. The sun rose. Birds sang. Wind moved through the live oak. No one spoke for 45 minutes. When Karen finally broke the silence, her voice was thick with emotion. I haven't felt peace like that in 10 years. Michelle looked at Elena. Can we do this again? Every Thursday, Elena said. For as long as it serves us. Word spread quietly. By the 3rd week, there were 8 women. By the 6th week, 12. Women were remembering how to breathe. Joanne stopped apologizing for crying. Michelle started a painting practice. Brenda brought a guitar and played soft instrumental music. New women brought new rhythms. Karen liked to walk the perimeter barefoot. Another woman brought essential oils and would anoint each person's hands. Elena realized this wasn't her community anymore. It was their community. One Thursday, a younger woman showed up, maybe late 40s. She introduced herself as Natalie. I know I'm not technically over 50, but I'm going through early menopause and I feel like I'm dying inside. If that makes sense? It makes perfect sense, Elena said. Come sit. The group was organic, messy, imperfect. Some mornings 15 women showed up. Some mornings only 3. Some mornings the silence was deep and holy. Other mornings it was restless. And that was okay. One morning, Patricia stayed behind to help clean up. Do you realize what you've done? Patricia asked. I haven't done anything. No. You created permission. You gave women permission to stop performing. Patricia smiled. That's everything. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. I just shared what I was learning. Exactly. You were vulnerable first. And that truth created space for the rest of us to tell our truth too. That's how community happens. Elena thought about that later. How community wasn't something she'd built. It was something she'd discovered. Discovered that other Christian women over 50 were experiencing the same transition. Discovered that vulnerability was contagious. Discovered that when you stop hiding your struggle, you give others permission to do the same. The sun was fully up now. Elena closed her eyes and felt gratitude. She'd thought she was alone in her 3:47 a.m. terror. Turned out, she was surrounded by women who knew exactly what that felt like. And together they were learning to flow. The name happened by accident. It was a Thursday in late October, 13 weeks after the first gathering. 18 women were on Elena's porch. They'd been sitting in comfortable silence when Michelle's phone buzzed. Then Brenda's, then Corinne's. It's okay, Elena said quietly. If you need to check, check. Michelle opened her messages and her face went pale. There's been a shooting at a high school in Dallas. The peace shattered. Natalie started crying. Her son was a junior at a Dallas high school. Different campus, but still. For a moment, the group didn't know what to do. But Patricia's voice cut through. We're already doing something. We're here together. Natalie, Patricia continued, text your son. The rest of us will wait with you. Natalie's hands shook as she typed, then her phone buzzed and she gasped with relief. He's okay. Different school. But his friend's sister, Elena, didn't think. She just moved, knelt beside Natalie, put her arms around her. Then Joanne moved, then Misha, then Grace. Within seconds, all 18 women had formed a circle around Natalie. Nobody spoke. Nobody offered platitudes. They just held her. Then Brenda started humming. It is well with my soul. Other voices joined, not singing words, just humming. They stayed like that for 10 minutes, maybe 15. When they finally pulled apart, Natalie whispered, "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done if I'd been alone." "You weren't alone," Elena said. "You're not alone. None of us are." Linda spoke up. "That's what this is. We're sisters. Sisters who show up for each other. 5 a.m. sisters," Michelle said suddenly. Everyone looked at her. "That's who we are. We're the 5 a.m. sisters. The women who wake up early, who meet in the dark, who hold space for each other when the world breaks." "Yes," Joanne laughed. "That's exactly who we are." Patricia pulled out her phone. "I'm making a group text right now." Within minutes, 18 women were connected in a thread called 5 a.m. Sisters. The first message came from Natalie. "Thank you for being my family when I needed one. I love you all." The responses flooded in. "Love you. Here for you. Always." That morning, after everyone had left, Elena sat alone on her porch, staring at the group text. She thought about where she'd been 5 months ago, waking at 3:47 a.m. in terror. Alone, convinced something was wrong with her, and now she was here. Part of a sisterhood she hadn't planned, part of a movement that had started with her surrender. Soul flowing wasn't just her practice anymore. It was their practice. Over the following weeks, the group text became a living thing. Women would post at all hours. "Awake at 3:18 a.m. Praying for all of you. Just got hard news from the doctor. Need your prayers. Feeling invisible again. Remind me I matter." And always within minutes responses would come. Not fixing, just presence. "I see you. I'm with you. You're not alone." Thursday mornings changed too. They'd end the silence with a brief check-in. Or end by singing together. One Thursday in November, Grace brought an idea. What if we did something for other women? Women who are where we were 5 months ago. Like what? Brenda asked. Maybe testimonies? We could each write our story, share them somewhere. Joanne said, "I'd read those stories. If I'd found them 6 months ago when I was desperate, they would have saved me. But we don't make it a program," Patricia said firmly. "We're not selling anything. We're just sharing truth and inviting others to find their own flow." They decided each woman who felt called would write her story. Elena would compile them, create a simple blog, call it 5 a.m. Sisters, not to build a following, just to throw a rope to women drowning in the same waters they'd barely survived. The night before the blog launched, Elena sat at her laptop at 2:47 a.m. reading through the testimonies. Joanne's story about her husband's death. Michelle's story about retirement. Brenda's story about her son joining the military. Natalie's story about early menopause. Elena's own story. 18 women, 18 stories. All different. All the same. The blog went live at 5 a.m. Thursday morning. Elena hit publish and set her laptop aside. "It's done," she said quietly. "What happens now?" Karen asked. Elena smiled. "Now we flow, and we trust that whoever needs to find it will." The sun rose over the horizon, and in living rooms and kitchens across the country, women who'd been waking at 3:47 a.m. for months stumbled across a blog post that said, "You're not broken. You're being invited. Welcome to the flow." Portland, Oregon, 3:22 a.m. Rachel Wu typed Christian women insomnia anxiety into Google for the 100th time. Instead, the first result was, I woke up at 3:47 a.m. for months thinking I was dying. Here's what I discovered. Rachel's hand froze. That was her. Exactly her. 20 minutes later, she was crying at her kitchen table, reading Elena's story like it had been written specifically for her. At the bottom, you're not broken. You're being invited into something gentler. Maybe it's time to stop fighting and start flowing. Rachel sat back. Maybe it was time. She didn't have a back porch, but she had a window seat overlooking the city. She had a blanket, a Bible. That morning, instead of fighting the waking, she sat by her window and watched Portland wake up. And for the first time in 8 months, the anxiety didn't come. Nashville, Tennessee, 4:03 a.m. Shanice Johnson scrolled through Facebook. Her daughter had shared a post. Y'all need to read this. The link led to Joanne's testimony about grief and finding God again in the silence after her husband died. Shanice had lost her mother 2 years ago. Since then, prayer felt like talking to a wall. But this woman understood. Shanice got out of bed, went to her living room, lit a candle, and sat in her favorite armchair though when her mother used to sit in. She didn't try to pray. She just sat with the candle, with her grief, with God. And something in her chest, something clenched tight for 24 months, finally began to loosen. Rudal Montan, a -5:47 a.m., Catherine O'Brien found the blog through a friend's email forward. She'd been a ranch wife for 34 years, up before dawn for chores. At 62, she was still working the ranch, still strong. But something had shifted. The early mornings that used to energize her now felt heavy. She read Michelle's testimony about realizing she'd been grinding so hard she'd forgotten how to simply be. Catherine sat at her kitchen table and laughed. Grinding. That's exactly what she'd been doing. What if she stopped? She grabbed her coffee, walked out to the porch, sat in the rocking chair her grandmother had left her, and she wept from relief because God was there, in the mountains, in the sunrise, in the rocking chair, not demanding anything, just present. Boston, Massachusetts, 2:58 a.m. Dr. Angela Martinez couldn't turn her brain off. She was a surgeon, used to being in control. But at 59, with mandatory retirement looming, the anxiety was eating her alive. She searched finding purpose after 50 and stumbled into the 5 a.m. Sisters blog. Brenda's testimony stopped her. What if my value was just in being God's daughter? What if I didn't have to earn my worth anymore? Angela read that line 5 times. What if she didn't have to earn her worth anymore? Her whole life had been about achievement. But what happened when she wasn't the youngest or the best anymore? She didn't know how to be just Angela. But maybe it was time to learn. She started taking 10 minutes before every surgery to sit in the doctor's lounge, close her eyes, and just breathe and pray. God, teach me who I am when I'm not performing. It was terrifying. It was also the most honest prayer she'd said in 40 years. Austin, Texas, 4:44 a.m. Maria Flores had been awake since 3 a.m., scrolling Instagram to avoid the panic. A Naji appeared to every woman who wakes up at 3 a.m., convinced something is wrong. What if nothing is wrong? What if you're being invited? Maria clicked through, read Elena's story, then Natalie's, then Grace's. By the time she finished, she was sobbing because she'd thought she was the only one. But she wasn't alone. There were hundreds of comments, thousands of shares, women everywhere saying, "Me too." Maria grabbed her journal and wrote, "Dear God, I don't know how to do this yet, but I'm willing to learn. Show me." It wasn't eloquent, but it was honest. And that was what God wanted most. Virtual comment section. Throughout the day, I've been waking at 2:11 a.m. for 7 months. This is the first thing that's made sense. I'm 68, and I thought spiritual dryness was just what happened when you got old. Thank you. Started my own flow space this morning. Felt God there for the first time in years. Sent this to my mom. She's 71 and struggling. Maybe it'll help. Elena's back porch that evening. Elena sat at sunset, laptop open, reading comments with tears streaming down her face. Patricia came over. You okay? I don't know. I thought maybe 10 people would read these, but there are hundreds of comments because they have been experiencing the same thing, Patricia said gently. You just gave them language for it. It feels too big, then don't make it big, keep it simple. Keep flowing. Patricia squeezed her hand. Your job isn't to manage their transformation. Your job is to keep showing up to your own. Elena nodded, closing the laptop. Patricia was right. The sun dipped below the horizon. Somewhere in Portland, a woman was sitting by her window without panic. Somewhere in Nashville, a woman was learning to grieve without performing strength. Somewhere in Montana, a woman was discovering that watching sunrise could be prayer. Somewhere in Boston, a surgeon was learning her worth wasn't in achievements. Somewhere in Austin, a woman was writing her first honest prayer in years. And here, Elena was learning that their stories mattered more than she'd imagined. Not because they were special, but because they were true. And truth was the most powerful current of all. Elena was folding laundry when her phone rang. Unknown number. Elena Torres. Yes, this is Reverend Mitchell from Grace Community Church in Houston. We're hosting a women's conference in March. 3,000 women. We'd love to have you speak, share your story, teach about soul flowing. 6 months ago, Elena would have said yes immediately, but something in her gut said no. Can I pray about it and get back to you? Elena asked. Of course, but I'll need an answer by Friday. Elena hung up and sat on the edge of the bed. 3,000 women. A platform wasn't that confirmation, but the thought of standing on a stage, teaching a method, packaging soul flowing into a 3-point sermonette made her feel sick. She texted Patricia, "Did you give my name to Reverend Mitchell?" Patricia called immediately. I did. Should I have asked first? It's okay. I don't think I'm supposed to do it. Why not? It just doesn't feel right. Doesn't feel like flowing. Patricia was quiet. Then, don't do it. Divine timing isn't about jumping at every opportunity. It's about waiting for the yeses that come with peace. Elena had been learning about divine timing in small ways for months, like the way she'd stopped forcing conversations with her children. Used to be, she'd text them multiple times a week. When they didn't respond, she'd spiral. But lately, she'd been letting them come to her. Not out of resentment, out of trust. And they started calling more. Sophia had texted, "Mom, can we talk? I need advice." Isabella called on a random Wednesday just to chat. Daniel sent a voice memo. "Been thinking about you. Love you." When Elena stopped forcing connection started flowing naturally. The same thing happened at work. She'd always volunteered for extra shifts, partly because she cared, partly because she needed to be needed. But a few weeks ago, when her manager asked if she could pick up a Saturday shift, Elena had paused, checked in with her body, felt the grinding sensation. So she'd said, "No, I need to rest this weekend, but I can take a shift next month." Her manager blinked. Elena never said no. "Okay, thanks for being honest." And nothing bad happened. Elena was learning. Divine timing meant saying no to good things so she could say yes to the right things. The blog was another test. After the testimonies went viral, Elena started getting emails. Publishing companies about turning the blog into a book. Podcast hosts wanting interviews. A retreat center inviting her to lead a weekend workshop. Each felt flattering, like evidence that God was expanding her influence. But every time Elena tried to say yes, she felt that grinding sensation. This isn't the current. This is swimming upstream again. She talked to the 5 a.m. sisters about it. "What do I do? I want to help, but I feel like if I turn this into a platform, I'll lose what made it real." Joanne spoke up. "What if helping isn't about doing more? What if it's just about being faithful to what you've already been given, which is what? Thursday mornings, the blog, as it is, your own practice, your own flow. Joanne leaned forward. You don't have to scale this. You just have to keep showing up here. Linda nodded. Divine timing isn't about maximizing reach, it's about faithful presence. Elena felt something release. She didn't have to build anything, didn't have to capitalize on momentum. She just had to keep flowing. She declined the conference, declined the book deal, declined most podcast interviews, except one small show whose questions felt genuine. She kept the blog simple. One post per month, nothing forced, and she noticed the blog kept growing anyway. Slowly, organically. One evening, Mark asked, "So, what's the plan? Where's it going?" Elena set down her fork. "I don't know. You don't know. I don't know. And I'm okay with not knowing. Divine timing means I don't have to know where this is going. I just have to pay attention to where it's flowing right now." And where's it flowing right now? Thursday mornings, the porch. 18 women learning to breathe. That's it. That's enough. Mark studied her. You're different. You're not frantic anymore. You're just here. Present. Elena reached across the table. Divine timing isn't about cramming more into the time I have. It's about being fully present to the time I'm actually living in the next morning. Elena woke at 4:38 a.m., made her coffee, sat in her wicker chair. The mockingbird was singing. Stars were fading, and Elena felt it. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not building a brand, not chasing opportunities, just showing up. Day after day, trusting that divine timing knew better than she did. The sun began to rise, and Elena wasn't worried about what came next. She was too busy being present to what was here now, and now was exactly enough. Elena sat at her kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, laptop open, cursor blinking. She'd been avoiding this for weeks. The 5 sisters kept asking, "When are you going to write the invitation?" But every time she tried, the words felt wrong, too instructive, too much like selling something. Finally, she just started typing what she wished someone had told her 6 months ago. To the woman reading this at 3 a.m., I see you. I see you lying there in the dark, heart pounding, mind racing, wondering what's wrong with you, wondering why prayer feels like pushing a boulder uphill, why your life, which looks fine on paper, feels increasingly empty. I see you because I was you. 6 months ago, I woke up at 3:47 a.m. convinced I was dying. Panic attacks, visits, prayers that evaporated. I thought I was broken. Turns out I was being invited to stop grinding and start flowing. Invited to discover that this season wasn't about finding new purpose, but about learning a new way to be. I don't have a program. I don't have a 5-step plan. What I have is an invitation. What if the waking isn't a curse? What if it's God making space for something you'd never create room for on your own? What if the exhaustion is your body saying, there has to be another way? What if the prayer drought isn't abandonment? What if God is weaning you off performance so you can learn what it means to simply be loved? Here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying quit your job or abandon responsibilities. I'm not saying meditation will solve everything. I'm not saying you need to wake at 5 a.m. or have a back porch or anything external. Here's what I am saying. Soul flowing is about learning to move with God's rhythm instead of against it. It's about positioning yourself by the river instead of trying to generate the current. It's about discovering that rest isn't earned, it's received. So what does it look like? For me, it's waking early, sitting on my porch, drinking coffee. For Rachel in Portland, it's sitting by her window. For Catherine in Montana, it's watching sunrise over the mountains. For Dr. Martinez in Boston, it's 10 minutes before surgery. Your flow will look different. And that's right. The question isn't, what did Elena do? The question is, where do I feel most connected? Maybe it's early morning. Maybe it's late at night. Maybe it's a walk or a corner of your bedroom. The point isn't the location or the time. The point is learning to stop forcing and start receiving. If you're reading this and something in you is saying yes, start small. Ask, where is one place I could create space? 1 hour? One practice that feels like flowing instead of forcing? Maybe it's waking 15 minutes earlier, not to accomplish more, but to just be. Maybe it's turning off your phone for 1 hour. Maybe it's saying no to one obligation. Maybe it's admitting you're exhausted and you need something different. Start there. And if you need companionship, you're not alone. There are women everywhere learning to flow instead of grind. We call ourselves the 5 a.m. sisters, not because we all wake at 5 a.m., but because we are the women who show up in the vulnerable hours. You're welcome here. Exhausted, confused, grinding yourself into dust. We see you, we've been you, and we're here to tell you there's another way. You don't have to have it figured out. You just have to show up. Be honest. Stop forcing, start receiving, and trust that the current will carry you exactly where you need to go. Elena read what she'd written, tears streaming down her face. This was it. Not a sales pitch, just truth. Invitation, permission. She hit publish. Then she closed her laptop and sat on her porch in the afternoon light. Somewhere, a woman would read those words at 3 a.m. and feel seen. Somewhere, a woman would realize she wasn't broken. Somewhere, a woman would take her first step toward flowing. Elena couldn't control who found the invitation, couldn't force transformation, but she could witness, could tell the truth, could throw a rope to women drowning in the same waters. The mockingbird started its evening song, and Elena felt deep peace knowing she'd done what she was called to do. She'd invited them in. The rest was up to them. Elena woke at 4:44 a.m. on a Thursday in late April. No alarm, just her body knowing. She made her coffee, wrapped Abuela's blanket around her shoulders, and walked out to the back porch. 12 women were already there. Patricia was in the wicker chair, journal open. Joanne was on a cushion, eyes closed. Michelle had her watercolors set up, already painting. Brenda was tuning her guitar. Grace was lighting candles. Linda was simply sitting, smiling at nothing. 6 other women scattered across the porch in various postures of rest and attention. No one spoke. They just made space for each other. Elena settled onto the porch railing and watched the horizon begin its slow transformation. This was soul flowing, not a meeting. Just women showing up to the current. The mockingbird started singing. Brenda began playing. Michelle's brush moved. Someone's breathing hitched with tears. Someone's shoulders relaxed. And Elena felt it. The presence of something bigger than all of them. After the sun had risen and the women began to stir, Elena's phone buzzed. Sophia, Mom, I need to tell you something. Can we FaceTime tonight? 6 months ago, Elena would have spiraled. Now, she just typed, of course, baby. 7 p.m. work for you. Perfect. Love you. Whatever Sophia needed to tell her, Elena would be present for it. Not fixing, not controlling, just receiving her daughter exactly as she was. That evening, Sophia's face filled the screen. She looked nervous, excited. So, I've been doing a lot of thinking about faith, about who I am. Elena's heart clenched, but she stayed quiet, listening. And I wanted to tell you that I've been reading your blog, the 5 a.m. sisters thing. Mom, it's helping me. I've been waking up early too. Just sitting with my coffee with God, trying to figure out who I am. Tears sprang to Elena's eyes, and I realized I've been grinding too. Grinding to prove I'm okay being gay and Christian. And I'm so tired. Mom, I know, baby. I know exactly what that feels like. The blog gave me permission to just stop, to sit with God and let Him love me without performing. Sophia wiped her eyes. So I wanted to say thank you. Elena couldn't speak, could only cry and smile and nod. Her daughter was learning to flow. 19, that alone made everything worth it. The blog kept growing, slowly, steadily. Comments rolled in daily. Started my first flow practice this morning. Cried for 20 minutes, but in a good way. I'm 64 and I thought my best years were behind me. This is teaching me they might be ahead. I live in Nebraska. No one to meet with, but I feel connected to all of you anyway. Elena had stopped reading every comment, not because she didn't care, but because she'd learned her job wasn't to manage everyone's transformation. Her job was to keep showing up to her own. One Thursday in May, a younger woman showed up, maybe 35. I know this is for women over 50, but I'm drowning. 3 kids under 7. I work full-time, and I wake up at 3 a.m. every night, convinced I'm failing. Patricia stood up, took the woman's hand. Sit. You belong here. But I'm not. Exhaustion doesn't have an age requirement, Patricia said firmly. If you're grinding yourself into dust, you're welcome here. The woman Amos sat and cried and stayed. Present day, Elena stood on her back porch at 4:33 a.m., alone. No gathering today. Just her and God in the quiet before dawn. She thought about where she'd been a year ago, waking at 3:47 a.m. in terror, and where she was now. Still waking early, but not in terror, in anticipation. Still uncertain about the future, but not afraid. Still learning, still discovering, still flowing. The panic attacks were gone. The insomnia had transformed into a sacred appointment. She was still a nurse, still Mark's wife, still her children's mother, but she was also, finally, fully, Elena. Not Elena, who existed to be useful, but Elena, who existed to be beloved. Her belovedness came first. Her usefulness flowed from that. The sky began to lighten. Coral, rose, gold. And Elena felt the invitation rising not for her, but for every woman who might stumble across this story. Join the flow, not because you have to, but because you're tired. Tired of grinding, tired of performing, tired of trying to be who you were 20 years ago. Join the flow because you deserve a gentler way. Because God's rhythm is not the world's rhythm. Because finding purpose after 50 isn't about discovering a new mission, it's about discovering a new way of being. Because biblical rest for women isn't a luxury, it's a birthright. Because soul flowing changes everything. You don't need perfect circumstances. You just need willingness. Willingness to stop fighting. Willingness to create space. Willingness to be honest about the grinding and brave enough to try something different. Start tomorrow morning. Wake up 15 minutes early. Make your coffee. Find a quiet spot. Just bring yourself, tired, confused, grinding into dust yourself. And sit. Read a few verses or don't. Journal or don't. Pray or just breathe. The point isn't what you do. The point is that you show up. And eventually you'll feel it. The current, God's gentle rhythm. The flow that's been waiting for you. This is for you. The Christian woman over 50 who thought her best years were behind her. The woman whose children have left. The woman whose body is changing. The woman whose prayer life feels dead. The woman who wakes at 3 a.m. convinced something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. You're being invited into rest, into rhythm, into a way of being that doesn't require you to earn your worth. You're being invited to flow. And we're here, thousands of us now, waiting to tell you, you're not alone. You're not broken. And there's room in this current for you. Elena opened her eyes as the sun crested the horizon, flooding the world with light. She lifted her coffee mug toward the sky, a silent toast to every woman who would find this message. To every woman brave enough to stop grinding and start flowing. To every woman who would discover that the 3:47 a.m. terror was actually a 5 a.m. invitation. The current was flowing. It had been flowing all along. All they had to do was stop fighting it and let it carry them home.